Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ace Ka. I know it's been a long month without an upload, but, holidays, a lot of December is a very busy month, a lot of birthdays, a lot of Christmas, a lot of things like that. So, also I'm just lazy. With that out of the way, this is Chapter 12. Vinyl had never felt more nervous in her life, or more excited. She hadn't moved since Octavia left. She couldn't move. Every muscle was frozen, each hoof rooted to the ground by thoughts. She said she liked it. The DJ licked her lips again, as she had been doing for the past half hour, but she tasted nothing but skin. No, she said she didn't hate it. There's a difference. She was just trying to spare my feelings. But that painful thought was quickly obliterated by virtue of a simple fact. She kissed me first. Finally, a grin broke through her conflicted expression. As the sun finally broke through the clouds outside and shone through the window, so too did that simple reality burn away her shadowed doubts and worries. No matter what happened when Octavia got back, she would always have that knowledge. Vinyl trudged over to the computer. She didn't feel like making music anymore. The reason being that what had started as an escape from reality had accidentally turned into the biggest reminder in the room. So she simply saved her progress and powered down her equipment. Without the gentle whirring of her computer, the room seemed oddly muffled. The absence of noise was just as distracting as having the volume on maximum. "Hurry up, Philly," she said, immediately feeling stupid as the words left her mouth. "Yeah, hurry up and deal with your emotional issues, which I probably caused, and get back here because I'm lonely." "Why am I such an idiot?" the unicorn whispered, smacking her face with the hoof. Before any suitable answer could present itself, the stifling silence was broken by the turning of a handle. She held her breath as the gray mare on whom all her thoughts were focused entered the room. The cellist was smiling, but Vinyl was too nervous to return it. Swallowing, she decided to let her roommate speak first. It was a tense few moments as Octavia closed the door and walked over to her, each second an eternity, each hoofstep a thunderclap. But no words ever came. Instead, there was a blur of motion and the sudden feeling of warmth against her chest. Vinyl hugged her back without a second thought, finally letting a smile slip out. "I'm guessing you feel better now," chuckled the DJ. Octavia squeezed even harder, pressing her cheek into the other mare's white coat. "Mm-hmm." Vinyl couldn't help but inhale as much as the cellist scent as possible, trying to commit it to memory forever. There were no defining traits of the smell, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't think of enough words to describe it. All that came to mind was a name. Octavia. It encapsulated everything the scent meant, every feeling it induced within her, all the fury and want and innocent desire she had denied for weeks, in a single word. "Octavia?" she said shakily, closing her eyes in order to reinforce the feeling of gray skin against her. "Yes, Vinyl," replied the mare in question. "Please tell me this means what I think it means." They pulled back in unison so they could see each other's face. The DJ slowly raised her head to meet the cellist's gaze. "Well, what do you think it means?" she asked, as Vinyl desperately tried not to get lost in the endless violet of her eyes. Her heart pounding in her ears, Vinyl tried to form the words that had seemed so simple a few moments ago. "You... I like you." The statement sent heat rushing over the unicorn's body, but she had to be sure. Like? Like, giggled the cellist. And so the time for words drew to a close. Vinyl celebrated the occasion by pushing forward and kissing her roommate as hard as she could. Octavia squeaked in surprise, but didn't try to pull away. The room was quiet, but for the sound of locked lips, heavy breathing, and the quietest vocalizations of happiness. It was a moment that they could never lose, one that would define their bond in the coming days. Standing as they were in the dusty glass-filtered sunlight, it looked as though a new dawn had arrived, marking their beginning with its own. It was only when a slightly less than refined noise escaped Octavia's mouth did they recall their senses. The offending mare cleared her throat as even more blood rushed to her cheeks. Let's just pretend that didn't happen." Vinyl leaned in to nuzzle her. "Not a chance." Octavia stepped backwards out of the DJ's reach, panting slightly. I think we need to stop for a little while. I haven't eaten since breakfast. For a few seconds, Vinyl contemplated pushing forward and continuing. Something about the cellist's body language told her such actions wouldn't receive many objections. But wasn't being pushy the reason Octavia got stressed out in the first place? No. This time, she would do things right. Want to head out and get something, then? Grateful for the few seconds to catch her breath, the gray mare raised an eyebrow thoughtfully. Do you have anywhere in mind? How about we just go walking and see where we end up, suggested Vinyl, floating her glasses over from her desk. That sounds perfect. But as the unicorn made for the door, Octavia stepped in her path. Do you think you could leave your glasses here? Huh? Why? The cellist sheepishly pawed at the ground with her right foreleg. Because you have very pretty eyes. They shouldn't be hidden away. Vinyl's mouth worked, but nothing came out. In her 18 years of existence, no pony had ever complimented her eyes, at least not sincerely. While she had been lucky enough to escape most teasing during high school, there had been a few incidents. But, at least for a moment, the DJ forgot all about those ponies from her past. Instead, she removed the glasses and set them down once more. She suddenly felt very vulnerable from the reminder of how the world looked behind tinted glass. Really? She asked in a small voice. The other mare must have sensed the change in mood, for she quickly moved closer. Vinyl, they are beautiful. She touched Vinyl's cheek. You are beautiful. As corny as that was, thanks. They moved forward simultaneously for a quick peck, careful not to get carried away again. Well, Octavia adjusted her mane once more. Shall we? As expected, the streets were still cold and gray. An icy wind ripped through all who dared to venture outside, sending papers and manes alike into disarray. Most of the stores were open, but the cafes had all moved their tables inside and closed their shutters. From behind each door, the warm glow of light beckoned. But Vinyl was fine where she was, walking beside a gray mare trying desperately to salvage her hair. This was an awful idea, she called over the wind. Just let it go, replied the laughing DJ. I'll look ridiculous. There's no pony around. Who cares? With a final futile attempt to wrangle her mane, the cellist sighed in defeat and lowered her hoof. Within seconds, her charcoal hair was billowing freely behind her. I feel ridiculous, she sulked. Oh, come on. My mane's going crazy, too. Octavia gave her a flat look. Your mane is crazy whether the wind is blowing or not. The difference is that it suits you. The unicorn grinned and bumped her flank against the other mare, eliciting an amusing squeak. You can fix everything when we get to wherever we're going. Until then, be free! Though she returned the grin after a moment's hesitation, it quickly took on a more sinister appearance. Without thinking, Octavia darted closer and bit lightly on the DJ's exposed ear. It took less than a second, but the results were substantial. Vinyl stumbled and fell on her chest, hind legs in the air. A treble clef-marked mare started to giggle, but stopped abruptly as her brain caught up with her actions. They kissed once, and now they're just like, what are they doing? Like, they kissed once, and then she hugged him, and then they kissed again, and then... Now what? This is like their relationship was at level 5, and now it's at 9. Things are escalating too quickly. This can only end badly. Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you all right? She quickly helped her roommate stand back up. Her white cheeks were red, probably from hitting the ground, but otherwise there were no visible injuries. That was straight up mean. The unicorn tried to look angry, but she couldn't hold back a smirk. If the cellist was one of those ponies who had unclean thoughts, she would have wondered if Vinyl liked being bitten on the ear. Thankfully, she was not one of those ponies, and she definitely didn't wonder anything of the sort. Vinyl turned her attention back to the road ahead. To her relief, she saw an enticing little diner on the corner of the street. It was one of the older kinds, with red seats lining little booths. a long bar in the center from which to order, and checkered floors that gave the whole building a decidedly old-fashioned look. One that the DJ, despite her love of technology, felt instantly attracted to. An old-fashioned date in an old-fashioned diner. I bet Octavia will love this. What do you think of this place? She asked nonchalantly. Octavia raised an eyebrow at the building in question, but soon broke into a warm smile. It does have a certain charm about it. The two mares trotted quickly through the door, eager to escape the cold. As expected, it was like walking into an open room on a summer day. Octavia immediately set to work trying to restore her mane to at least a semi-presentable state, while Vinyl made a beeline for a middle booth that looked out onto the street. Most of the tables and booths were occupied by other ponies who had also decided to take refuge from the weather. Their conversations and presence served to make the whole place feel welcoming. The DJ sat down and scooted over so the window was right next to her, intentionally making her roommate choose between sitting beside her or across from her. To her unspoken delight, Octavia sat down next to her and moved close enough that they would be muzzle to muzzle if they turned towards each other. To hide her ear-to-ear grin, the unicorn looked out the window into the darkening street, unaware of her friend's joy as she was. Octavia cleared her throat nervously and whispered, Am I too close? The high walls between each booth would prevent the other patrons from seeing, so Vinyl turned back and daringly snaked her hoof around the gray mare's waist, pulling her close for a quick side hug. Philly, you can never be too close to me. See this? How did they get this close? Like, just a moment ago, they were freaking out about being too shy to come up against each other, and now they're... What is it? What's happening here? Octavia giggled and risked a quick peck on Vinyl's cheek, causing them both to break out in barely stifled laughter. Only the sudden proximity of a waiter broke them out of their mirth. What can I get the two of you? He asked, wearing a smirk that said he hadn't missed a thing. I'll have... I don't actually know what's on the menu. Any recommendations? Vinyl tried to remain nonchalant as she subtly removed her hoof from the other mare's waist. Well, our dinner menu has everything from carrot roast to pumpkin soup. Or, we have the couple special. That might interest you. Octavia's ears folded back and she looked around as though some pony else would be hiding in the booth. Vinyl just gave him a flat, unamused stare. He raised an eyebrow, then blinked in understanding. Ah, my apologies. Still, undercover, are you? Not that it's any of my business, of course. The stallion lowered his voice. But would you like the couple special? Since the cellist couldn't quite bring herself to look him in the eyes, Vinyl answered for her in the form of a slight nod. The waiter winked and quickly trotted out of sight. I'm sorry, Vinyl, Octavia said guiltily. I'm being rather obvious, aren't I? She slid away slightly so that they weren't quite as close. Hey, I'm not exactly keeping things on the down low either. We just gotta be careful. Can you imagine what it would be like if Psyche found out? Oh, awful, I'd imagine. Octavia hid her small smile under the pretense of looking out of the booth for the tutor. Yeah, and that Lyra chick, too. She's such a bit... Language! We are in public. Ah, right. Scratching the back of her head, Vinyl grinned sheepishly. Well, she is. The cellist shrugged, deciding not to take a side until she knew the results of her last encounter with the admittedly uncivilized mint-green mare. After all, Octavia knew what it was like to be judged without question. At least she could do was try to prevent the cycle from continuing. By the time their meal arrived, the sun had completely vanished from view, cloaking the street outside in pitch-black fog punctuated by the occasional street lamp. But their attention was far from the miserable weather. 2 bowls of soup had been placed before them, bringing an intense, spicy aroma to the booth. Octavia had been cautious, but upon tasting it she found it was barely classable as hot. Confused as she was, between the contrast of taste and scent, she was unable to name a single ingredient in it. The taste was odd, but far from unpleasant, strangely similar to her first kiss with Vinyl. The thought sent a wave of heat up her neck, which the DJ noticed. Spice finally kicking in, huh? Lucky. Mine is pathetic. She spooned another helping into her mouth. Still pretty good, though. Ah, yes. The spice. The cellist dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. Well, perhaps it will keep us warm when we walk home. Vinyl winced, looking outside. Ah, geez. I forgot about that. I think we'll need something a lot stronger in our stomachs. A thought struck her, and she turned to her roommate. Hey, When's your birthday again? Oh, soon. Come on, tell me. You said it was a couple of weeks away when we first went to Blues, and that was like 3 months ago. Well, we had only just met. I wasn't about to tell you when my birthday was, replied Octavia indignantly, as though birthdays were somehow sacred knowledge. Vinyl rolled her eyes. I think we've gotten to know each other pretty well by now. The cellist reddened once more and told herself it was the soup. All right, then, if you insist. My birthday's in 3 weeks, just after the exams. Sweet! I'll throw a party for you! The DJ began to get excited at the prospect, which made Octavia feel even more ashamed of her next words. Vinyl? Who would I invite? After a moment, her roommate visibly slumped, only to perk back up seconds later. It can be just the two of us. We'll have our own party with card games and booze. A whole day with you? Why, Vinyl, that's just what I wanted. The gray mare covered her mouth with her hooves in mock excitement. Hey, don't knock it till you tried it. Trust me, it'll be awesome. As their bowls ran dry and the diner began to empty, the pair decided to begin the long walk home. The gray pony looked into the darkness and shivered. We need to buy boots, she whispered. And scarves, agreed the white pony. For a couple of minutes they walked in silence, save for the chattering of teeth and the slow trudging of hooves on the pavement. Vinyl couldn't help but chuckle at the silliness of their situation. If we freeze to death in the middle of Manhattan, I'm going to be so angry. Octavia didn't reply, instead moving closer to her roommate, enjoying the warmth radiating off of her. Yeah, good idea. Nice old-fashioned body heat. Always good to fall back on. Can't go wrong with it, that's for sure. The DJ realized she was babbling and swallowed nervously. After that weird, taste-defying soup, she was starting to have some very interesting thoughts, and it wasn't helping that the subject of many of them was practically pressed up against her. Apparently, the other mare was feeling something similar, for she moved closer and rubbed her cheek against Vinyl's neck. Her eyes were closed, and a silly smile made it clear that she wasn't thinking quite as logically as normal. Oh, Celestia, she's so soft. You all right there, Octavia? As much as she hated to interrupt, this wasn't the way she wanted whatever was happening. The charcoal-maned mare seemed to snap out of her daze, quickly halting her happy nuzzling. Oh, I'm sorry. I lost track of my thoughts for a second. Yeah, me too. I think that dude wasn't kidding when he said couple special. Vinyl forced a laugh to keep her thoughts from straying. What do you mean? Octavia decided to play dumb, hoping her blush wasn't visible in the night. Well, don't you feel, frisky? I was blaming that on being in close proximity to you, she admitted. A triumphant grin split Vinyl's lips, and she puffed her chest out. Yeah, I have that effect on ponies. Oh, shush you. The campus was far better lit than the city, for which they were very grateful. The only sounds were from a few drunken revelers stumbling from the direction of the university tavern. Octavia shook her head and sighed. Some students just didn't know how to spend an evening. By the time they stumbled through the doorway into their room, most of the weird feelings had subsided. All that was left was a sleepy feeling of contentedness. This time, as she leaned against Vinyl, she yawned and tried to move closer. The DJ chuckled and spoke so softly that it was hard to tell if she meant for her to hear. You're so cute. Vinyl led her over to a bed, not really caring about who it belonged to. Come on, I'm feeling pretty tired too. Octavia did as she was directed, crawling beneath the covers and curling up. Even after the blanket was pulled up, she slivered slightly. She frowned in thought for a moment, but the solution quickly presented itself. With a pulse of tired magic, the unicorn lifted the blanket from the other bed and brought it over, giving the cellist another layer. Apparently, she wasn't completely checked out yet, as she raised her neck in concern. But you'll be cold, she said softly. But wait, the unicorn is not Octavia. But you'll be cold, she said softly. Hey, I've slept on the street before. This is fine. No, get in. It took an entire millisecond before the DJ gave in to her roommate's demand. Well, if you insist. She struggled to suppress her grin as she slid in beside Octavia, loving the warmth of both the blankets and the mare. Her own questionable feelings had fled as well, but what remained was no less powerful. Here she was, cuddling with the pony who had plagued her dreams for so long. How many of those dreams had ended like this, only for her to awake and find her bed empty? She squeezed harder, refusing to let go. If this was a dream, she never wanted to wake up. "Do you know what the strangest thing about this is?" whispered Octavia. Vinyl shook her head slightly. "What's that?" "This doesn't feel strange at all." Oh my goodness. I don't know if I like the way this is going. Excuse me. Like, whoever wrote this, Dawn Fade, had a nice pacing going, you know? There were a bunch of chapters leading up to the point where they'd finally get together, so it felt realistic. There were a few things that, cut my belief a little bit, but it worked. Then they shared one kiss. Octavia went to the therapist, and the therapist is like, "Yeah, it's okay, whatever." And now, I mean, they haven't fucked yet, obviously, but they're acting like they've been together for years. They just met. They were so nervous to interact with each other, and now they're already doing this kind of stuff. I'm not liking it. But this is chapter 13. Dreamless. As Vinyl emerged from the depths of sleep, that one fact remained at the front of her mind. She had had a dreamless night, and she knew why. For the last couple of weeks, every night had been plagued with the same nocturnal hallucinations. Treble clefs amongst darkness, and a pony by her side. A gray one, specifically, of the earth pony variety. But last night, she had slept peacefully, and it was with a big smile that she reached out to hug the reason why. When her hooves grasped nothing but disturbed sheets, the DJ's eyes shot open, revealing an empty space beside her. Her heart jumped, and for a moment she felt an indescribable sadness begin to weigh down on her as the events of the previous night were suddenly called into question. "No," she whispered, eyes watering. "Not again. Please." The door to the bathroom opened, unleashing a small wave of steam that rolled across the floor. Octavia stepped through it, her mane slicked to her glistening coat. She hummed softly, completely unaware of the red eyes watching from one of the beds. That is, until the pony they belonged to dove across the room in a single leap and tackled her. Octavia suddenly had to deal with a very happy unicorn lying on top of her. Vinyl didn't care that her coat was also getting quite wet from hugging the freshly showered mare, or that lying on the floor was probably taking away the very thing her friend had just spent a while attaining. All she cared about in that moment was knowing that Octavia was real, that the night she remembered had actually happened, that her wish had been granted. The cellist didn't know of all this, so she was in a quite bewildered state when Vinyl drew back slightly to see her face. "I suppose I can expect this kind of greeting every day," she said half seriously. Chuckling, the DJ had finally woken up entirely and realized what she was doing. Sorry, I sorta panicked when you weren't there." It sounded so stupid to her ears now that she was thinking clearly, but Octavia didn't seem to think so. She pulled Vinyl down and kissed her deeply, hoping to assuage the white pony's fears in a way that words couldn't hope to emulate. It worked. Vinyl sighed into the kiss, her body relaxing almost immediately. They remained that way for a good few seconds, but as always it came to an end too soon. This time, however, it was for a very good reason. Octavia pulled her lips away, cursing the heat upon her cheeks. Vinyl, not to be rude or anything, but perhaps you should brush your teeth first." "Oh, yeah, right, sorry," Vinyl said, wondering if it was possible to explode from sheer embarrassment. "What was I thinking? I'm not a movie star. I'm gross in the morning like everyone else." She untangled her legs and stumble-tripped her way into the bathroom. As she quickly set to work brushing, she watched Octavia get up and adjust her mane. Then, to her unspoken internal glee, she watched the cellist cast a very questionable look her way. For a moment, she considered trying to say, "Like what you see," around a mouthful of toothpaste, but thought better of it. She'd embarrassed herself enough for one morning. Once finished, she bounded out the doorway with a huge grin. Now, where were we? Octavia had wandered over to Vinyl's bed and was in the process of pulling one of the blankets off. What are you doing?" "Reclaiming my blanket. If some pony saw my bed like that, I'd be ashamed." Her enthusiasm was fading. Vinyl pawed at the ground with her left forehoof. "So, you're sleeping in your bed tonight? Is that a problem?" Octavia frowned and stopped to look at the DJ. No, not really, but I was sort of thinking we could, She trailed off, looking everywhere but at the other mare. Sleep together? Asked Octavia quietly. Vinyl nodded, but upon seeing the blush in her roommate's cheeks, she quickly clarified. I mean, just sleep. I didn't mean anything else, unless you want that, but if you don't, that's fine. I only meant sleep. The situation was slipping out of her hooves now that topic had been awoken. She couldn't help but wonder why her impressive social skills had recently begun to desert her in times of need. Perhaps we should discuss this tonight. It's a little early in the day to be talking about this kind of stuff. Listening to her cellist, Vinyl experienced a brief moment of relief as she realized that she was not the only one who was feeling uncomfortable. Octavia bit her lip. That being said, I did enjoy waking up next to you. You kept squeezing me and grinning in your sleep. It took half an hour to escape your hooves. The DJ chuckled and shrugged, not the least bit surprised. I'd probably have done that whether I was asleep or not, she admitted. Giggling, Octavia left the blanket where it was, to be dealt with later. She wandered over to Vinyl and planted a tentative kiss on her cheek. So, breakfast? Resisting the urge to smother the cellist's muzzle with kisses, Vinyl grinned. Starving. As midday approached and breakfast became a memory, Vinyl had been forced to grudgingly excuse herself in order to attend her drawing class. Octavia had offered her services as a model again, but the class had apparently moved on to different subjects. That hadn't stopped the unicorn from slyly suggesting she might take up her offer later tonight, which left the cellist a blushing wreck long after the conversation had ended. Octavia tried to suppress her unrestrainable smile. Her cheeks ached, and she was certain she looked like a complete fool. But there was no stopping it. As she wandered across the grassy court in the middle of the campus, she felt a happiness like no other flood every fiber of her being. It was as if the universe had finally decided to go easy on her for once. After the years of loneliness in high school and the constant overwatch of her mother, she had reached the end of the tunnel, and the light was so bright. No longer would there be a little thought in the back of her mind that said, "You're alone, Octavia," when it was late at night. No longer would she cry herself to sleep at the thought of sitting by herself at lunchtime. It was over. And it had just begun. She soon realized she was approaching the same building Psyche worked in. Deciding that she agreed with her subconscious mind, the gray mare stepped inside and approached the receptionist. Psyche had helped her pass the barriers her mind had constructed, and was every bit as responsible for her happiness as Vinyl was. Well, maybe slightly less responsible, but he played a part nonetheless, and she wanted to make sure he knew what it meant to her. "Hello again, Miss Octavia. How may I help you?" the reception pony asked cheerfully. "Hello. I was wondering if Psyche was available." "He most certainly is. Just head on up and I'll call him to let you know you're coming." The mare grinned, baring her perfect teeth. Thank you." Octavia quickly escaped her rather unsettling gaze and made a beeline for the tutor's office. Just like before, the office worker stepped out of her way politely. She internally wondered why it was so off-putting. Yes, students were supposed to give way to teachers and workers out of respect, but maybe Manhattan University was a progressive institute that sought to abolish such behavior. Perhaps the staff were merely doing their part to uphold a core belief or code established by the faculty, making way for the younger, innovative ponies. Octavia suddenly became aware she'd been staring at the door to Psyche's office for slightly longer than was socially acceptable, and was holding up traffic in the hallway. Though from one glance was waiting ponies, she could almost believe that they all had the time in the world. Not one of them made a move to hurry her up. Mumbling an embarrassed apology, the cellist pushed through the door and closed it behind her. The frizzy-maned stallion, waiting for her, waved cheerfully. "Hey, Octavia! I'm glad you're here. Sorta. If you have any problems, then I'm not glad you're here. I mean, I'm glad you chose me to help with those problems, but I'm glad if you don't have problems." He frowned, then made a circular motion with his hoof as if winding back a clock. Hey, Octavia!" he repeated, this time not adding to it. "Hello, Psyche," she replied. It felt odd calling a teacher by their name, but she pushed past it. There were more important things to talk about. As she took the seat on the opposite side of his desk, he busied himself pulling out her file once more. "So, what can I help you with?" His expression was odd, caught between his default energetic mode and the serious, unflinching psychologist who had listened to 100 sob stories. "Thankfully, nothing." She smiled, which collapsed him into the former state. I did exactly what you said. It all came rushing back, and she tried to tell the story as fast as it crossed her mind. I went back to Vinyl, and I hugged her, and she asked me if it meant what she thought it meant, and I asked her what she thought it meant, even though I already knew, and she started to say, you like me, but she took so long, and I was so excited, so I just said, I like you, and she said, like, and I said, like, and then we kissed properly, and it was amazing. She bounced in her seat a little, wearing a grin that stretched ear to ear. She didn't even care how silly she looked. That's fantastic news. I'm so happy for both of you, Psyche chuckled. I'm always paranoid that I've given bad advice, so it's good to see it turned out well. On the contrary, your advice was perfect. That's actually why I'm here. I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. That was a fact that brought mixed emotions. On one hoof, she had all those miserable memories, but on the other hoof, they were gone, never to return. You helped me get here, Psyche. She slid off her chair and walked around the desk. The stallion looked a little uncomfortable for a moment, but relaxed when she hugged him, and hesitantly returned it. No doubt Vinyl would probably think hugging a teacher is about as lame as it gets, yet not even the thought of the DJ's voice-cracking laughter could ruin her good mood. Thank you, she whispered, pulling back and dropping onto all fours once more. To her surprise, she thought she saw a sparkling tear in the stallion's eyes, but he blinked and it was gone. Only doing my job, nothing more, he said with a warm smile. When Octavia returned to her chair, her mirth slipped away. So, I don't suppose you've heard from my mother? She shook her head. No, but I'm not going to count the days until she calls. I'm glad to hear that. With any luck, you'll be able to get to Hearthwarming Eve without hearing from her. Somehow I doubt that, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. The cellist nodded resolutely. Her mother was bad enough face to face. She didn't need the very thought of her ruining anything. I can definitely see the change in attitude, and I love it. Psyche laughed and clapped his hooves together. You must like being with Vinyl a lot if you can change your thought process so quickly. Octavia reddened but nodded. I do. I feel so normal when I'm around her. Not that that's abnormal or anything. I just mean that, well, I don't feel like an outcast. She accepts me for who I am without a second thought. It's such a nice feeling being with somebody who knows me, truly knows me, you know? Not just a group of ponies who have been forced to work with me by teachers who think they're helping. Psyche coughed. I remember watching all the other ponies in high school, with all their stupid groofs and styles, and I used to think that if I wanted to, I could change myself enough that I would fit into one of those groups, but I never did. You didn't want to compromise what little individuality you had left. Yes, exactly. I resigned myself to loneliness instead of giving up who I was, but with Vinyl, I can have both. I can be myself and have some pony who cares about me. It's quite literally a dream come true. I'm proud of you, Octavia. Your file here has listed some awful things that your mother made you share, things that only you should have the right to know. Yet, even after how she's treated you, you've managed to keep yourself together. I've seen kids break down after far less than what you've experienced, yet here you are, happy. It's admirable. After a long moment, Psyche shook his head violently and blinked a few times. Wow, I think that was the most serious I've ever been, he chuckled. You're going to ruin my reputation at this rate. My apologies, and thank you for what you said. She dropped off the chair once again, stretching her hooves. Now, I had better get going before we get trapped in a loop of mutual admiration. A wise decision. Those things are never fun. With a final wave, Octavia left the office and made her way back through the building. The receptionist threw a plastic smile her way, which she nervously returned. Once outside in the cool air, she found herself wandering a path not often taken. It led down a slope into a less populated area of the campus, where a series of little alcoves hid the entrances to multiple storage and maintenance rooms. For no reason other than the lack of having anything else to do, she walked down the path until something caught her interest. A voice was echoing out of an alcove further down, and it sounded strained. Octavia slowed her movement, trying to remain silent as the hidden pony's one-sided conversation became audible. No, please don't hang up, sniffed a familiar mare. Lyra? What's she doing down here? Please, Bon, just listen to me. I swear I'm different now. The cellist's eyes widened as she retreated as quickly as she could, trying to balance speed with silence. That conversation was not for her ears. Vinyl's privacy was the only one she ever allowed herself to breach, and even then she didn't really do anything bad. The DJ's phone didn't have anything even remotely embarrassing or personal. At the top of the slope, just before entering back into the huge court, Octavia heard footsteps behind her. Trying to look as casual as possible, she stood next to the wall and scratched her chin as if in deep thought. Lyra soon appeared at the bottom of the slope, scrubbing at her eyes as she trotted upwards. When she reached the top, rather than looking in the hundreds of other possible directions, the mint green unicorn looked straight at Octavia. What are you doing here? She asked. Her eyes were still a little red from crying, and the gray mare couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. I'm simply pondering the mysteries of life. She scratched her chin extra hard to illustrate her point. Near the maintenance sheds? Yes. Octavia dropped her hoof to the ground and quickly put a concerned look on. Oh my. Lyra, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm fine. She tried to walk away, but Octavia fell into line beside her. Have you considered what I said last time we spoke? Yeah, I might have. And? Lyra stopped walking, looking around to make sure no pony was close by. Look, I know you're just trying to help for whatever reason, but you don't want to be my friend, okay? Trust me, you'll be better off. Octavia couldn't help but wonder if the other mare was angry at herself than with any particular pony. What makes you say that? Just leave me alone, okay? I'm trying to save the friends I still have left. I don't need another one to worry about. She set off once more, and this time she went alone. Standing in the middle of the court, watching the confused unicorn go, Octavia felt guilt rise in the aft of her mind. Here she was, basking in her own joy, when other ponies were still dealing with their own problems. Happiness could never be all-encompassing, not in a world with so many complex lives. As she trudged her way to Vinyl's classroom, she couldn't help but feel a little disheartened by that depressing thought. What good is it to be happy if some pony else isn't? The white unicorn stepped out of the room amongst a flow of other ponies and yawned for a few seconds. Her eyes scanned the surroundings with bored disinterest until they lighted upon Octavia. Immediately, Vinyl's ears perked up and she started to smile as she trotted over. Hey, Rumi! Philly, am I happy to see you, she said cheerfully. Octavia just smiled. That was the answer to her sad question. It was good to be happy, because then she could spread it around. Well, see, the interaction in that chapter was a lot more believable than the interactions that they had last chapter. Because there was no physical interaction. There was no intense physical interactions. They were all holding each other at the diner and making out in the morning and all this stuff. It's not believable at this point in their relationship. It's not believable. And also, I hate to say it, but I'm more interested in the side plots than I am about the main plot. But, I guess that happens with some, works. Sometimes the side stories can be a bit more interesting, but I'm a lot more interested to see what's going on with Lyra and, how Psyche deals with Octavia's mom when she finally shows up. That's what I'm looking forward to. I don't care about Octavia and Vinyl's relationship. It doesn't feel genuine. I mean, it's a romance story, so obviously that's going to be the main thing. It's going to be the main plot here. But it just doesn't feel. It's not organic. It's not organic. That being said, I'll see you guys all next time. Sorry for the long hiatus. If you guys want to support me on Patreon, there's a link in the description. You get to tell me what I get to read. If you want to join me on Discord, there's live readings of everything I read every time I read them. So, there's a link for the Discord in the description. See you guys next time.